The hospital gave him 72 hours and a number so impossible it nearly destroyed him. A poor black teenager with only $6 in his pocket stopped in the pouring rain to help a sick old man everyone else ignored. People laughed at him. Some told him to mind his own business. But Jamal Carter bent down, picked up 6 fallen grocery bags, and carried them 3 miles across Chicago. What he didn't know was that the frail stranger walking beside him was hiding a secret powerful enough to change his life forever. Within days, Jamal would face heartbreak, betrayal, false accusations, and a desperate race to save his grandmother's life. And the only person who could help him was the very man he had helped without expecting anything in return. The rain came down hard over South Side Chicago, turning the grocery store parking lot into a gray sheet of water and oil-stained puddles. Headlights smeared across the wet pavement. Shopping carts rattled in the wind. A bus hissed at the stop across the street, its doors folding open and shut while tired people climbed aboard with their collars pulled high and their eyes fixed on the ground. Jamal Carter stood under the narrow awning beside Greenway Market, watching the rain drip from the torn edge of his jacket. He was 18 years old, though most days he felt much older. His left shoe had a split across the sole, and every time he shifted his weight, cold water squeezed through his sock. His stomach had been empty since morning, except for half a roll he had saved from the community kitchen. In his pocket were $6, folded twice and held together by a rubber band. That money was not for food. It was for bus fare and his grandmother's medicine copay if the pharmacy gave him trouble again. He looked toward the bus stop, then back at the grocery store doors. If he ran, he could still make the next bus home. If he missed it, he would have to walk almost 40 minutes through rain and traffic, and Grandma Gloria would start worrying. She always tried to hide it, but he knew the sound of her worry. It lived in the way she cleared her throat too often, in the way she checked the clock, in the way she smiled too brightly when he finally came through the door. Jamal pulled his hood tighter and stepped away from the wall. That was when he heard the cough. It was not the small cough people gave when rain hit their throat. It was deep, sharp, and wet, the kind that bent a body in half and made strangers look up before pretending they had not heard anything. Jamal turned. Near the curb, just beyond the automatic doors, an old white man stood with 6 plastic grocery bags hanging from both hands. He wore a dark wool coat that had soaked through at the shoulders. A gray hat sat crooked on his head. His face was pale beneath the yellow parking lot lights, and his hands trembled so badly the bag swung against his knees. He coughed again. One bag slipped. Cans rolled out and clattered across the pavement. A jar of applesauce hit the ground and cracked, pale gold spilling into the rain. A carton of eggs tipped sideways. The old man reached for them, but his knees buckled, and he grabbed the side of a parked car to keep from falling. People saw him. They had to see him. A woman in a beige raincoat stepped around a rolling can as if it were trash in the street. A man with a cart full of groceries pulled his hood lower and hurried toward his SUV. 2 teenagers under one umbrella laughed from near the vending machines. "Man, he about to drop the whole store," one of them said. The other one looked at Jamal and smirked. "Watch this dude try to play hero." Jamal stood still for half a second. He had learned young that stepping into other people's trouble could cost you. Sometimes people did not thank you. Sometimes they looked at your skin before they looked at your hands. Sometimes a black boy trying to help became a black boy accused of doing something wrong. His grandmother's voice rose inside him anyway. If someone is struggling and you can help, baby, you help. You don't need permission to be kind. The old man coughed again, one hand pressed against his chest. Another bag tore at the bottom. A loaf of bread slid into a puddle. Jamal moved. He crossed the parking lot with rain slapping his face and dropped to one knee beside the scattered groceries. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked. "Let me help you carry these." The old man blinked down at him, confused, as if kindness had become a language he no longer expected to hear. "You don't have to do that," he said. His voice was rough and thin. "I know," Jamal said. He picked up the cans first, wiping rainwater off the labels with his sleeve before placing them into the least torn bag. Beans, soup, peaches, tea, cough syrup, milk, bread. Small things, ordinary things, but the way the old man watched them, they looked almost precious. Behind him, someone laughed. "Broke helping broke," a woman muttered near the doorway. Classic. Jamal heard it. His shoulders tightened, but he did not turn around. A store employee stood just inside the entrance, arms folded over his green apron. He was young, maybe 25, with a name tag that said, Todd. He looked at Jamal, then at the old man, then at the mess on the pavement. "You all need to move from the front," Todd called. "People are trying to get through." Jamal looked up at him. He almost fell. Todd shrugged. "Not my problem." The words landed harder than the rain. Not my problem. Jamal had heard those words in different forms his whole life. When the landlord ignored the broken heater in January. When the clinic said the appointment had to be paid up front. When school counselors told him he had potential but not enough support. When people looked past him like poverty was something contagious. He gathered the last jar and stood, balancing 3 bags on each arm. The plastic handles cut into his fingers. The milk made one side heavier than the other. His wet jacket clung to his back. The old man reached weakly for one of the bags. "I can take some of those." "No, sir," Jamal said. "You just walk slow." The old man stared at him, then coughed into his sleeve. "What's your name, son?" "Jamal," he said. "Jamal Carter." The old man nodded slowly. "Arthur." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Arthur." Jamal adjusted the bags against his chest. "Where's home?" Arthur hesitated and looked out toward the street, where rain blurred the traffic lights into red and green halos. "Not far," he said. "How far?" "Maybe 3 miles?" Jamal almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because his body was already tired and the universe had a way of asking for the last thing he had left. 3 miles. In the rain. With 6 grocery bags, in shoes that had given up months ago. He thought about the bus. He thought about the $6 in his pocket. He thought about Grandma Gloria waiting beside the living room window, her hands folded over the blanket on her lap, pretending she was not counting minutes between breaths. Then he looked at Arthur's shaking hands. "I got you," Jamal said. Arthur frowned. "You sure?" "Yes, sir. You look like you've had a long day yourself." Jamal gave a small smile. "Long days don't scare me." The old man studied his face for a moment. Rain rolled down the deep lines around Arthur's eyes. There was something in those eyes Jamal did not understand. Not pity. Not exactly surprise. More like a man seeing something he had stopped believing existed. "All right," Arthur said quietly. "If you're sure." They started walking. At first, they moved slowly past the grocery store windows, where light spilled warm and yellow over the wet sidewalk. Jamal could feel people watching from behind the glass. The teenagers were still laughing. The woman in the beige raincoat had stopped under the awning, shaking her head as if he were foolish. Maybe he was. Maybe a smart person would have walked away. A smart person would have kept the $6 dry, caught the bus, gone home and minded his own business. But Jamal had never been good at watching someone suffer and calling it wisdom. They passed the bus stop just as the bus pulled in. The brakes squealed. The doors opened. Warm air breathed out from inside. Jamal looked at it for only a second. Then the doors closed, and the bus rolled away. Arthur noticed. You missed your ride, he said. I'll catch another one. In this rain? Jamal shrugged. Rain stops eventually. They turned down Franklin Avenue, where small storefronts glowed under neon signs. A laundromat, a payday loan place, a fried chicken shop with steam clouding the windows, a liquor store with bars across the glass. Music thumped from a passing car, then faded into the storm. Arthur walked with one hand lightly gripping Jamal's sleeve, not enough to slow him down, just enough to steady himself when the coughing came back. Every time Arthur coughed, Jamal shifted the bags and waited without saying a word. You from around here? Arthur asked after a while. Few blocks south, Jamal said. You live with family? My grandmother. No parents? Jamal kept his eyes on the sidewalk. My mom passed when I was little. Cancer. My father left before that. Grandma raised me. I'm sorry, thank you. There was no bitterness in his voice, only the careful calm of someone who had said those facts many times and learned to survive the silence that followed. Arthur glanced at him. Your grandmother must be proud. She says she is. Jamal smiled faintly. Even when I mess up. What kind of messes? Dropping out of school? Jamal said before he could stop himself. Arthur did not respond right away. Rain struck the hoods of parked cars like 1,000 little fingers. You wanted to leave school? No, sir. Jamal swallowed. She got sick. Heart problems. Medicine got expensive. Rent kept going up. Somebody had to work. And that somebody was you. Jamal looked down at the bags cutting into his hands. She took care of me when nobody else did. Wasn't much to think about. Arthur's grip tightened slightly on Jamal's sleeve. They walked on. By the second mile, the neighborhood began to change. The cracked sidewalks smoothed out. The corner stores gave way to brick homes with iron fences and trimmed hedges. Streetlights stood taller and brighter. The yards were wide, the windows clean, the porches empty but perfect. Like no one who lived there had ever sat outside waiting for a late bus or an overdue paycheck. Jamal noticed the silence first. In his neighborhood, there was always noise, sirens, kids, arguments, music, pipes knocking in the walls. Here, even the rain sounded softer, like it had been taught manners. Arthur pointed ahead with a trembling hand. There, he said, the house with the ivy. Jamal followed his finger and stopped walking. At the end of Oakwood Lane sat a large brick house behind a black iron gate. Ivy climbed along one side. Warm lights glowed from tall windows. The front porch had white columns, 2 hanging lanterns, and a dark wooden door that looked heavier than anything in Jamal's apartment building. For a moment, Jamal thought Arthur must be pointing beyond it. But Arthur reached into his coat, took out a small remote, and pressed a button. The iron gate opened with a low mechanical hum. Jamal looked at him. Arthur looked embarrassed. It's not as grand as it seems, the old man said. Jamal almost laughed again. In his world, a working elevator counted as grand. He carried the groceries up the stone path while rain dripped from his sleeves. The porch was dry beneath the roof, and the sudden quiet under it felt strange. Jamal set the bags down gently beside the door, making sure the bread was not crushed and the cracked applesauce jar stood upright. His arms ached. His fingers stung. His shirt clung to his skin. He tried not to shiver. Arthur unlocked the door, but did not go inside right away. Come in, he said. Let me get you a towel. A hot drink, at least. Jamal shook his head. I appreciate it, Mr. Arthur, but I need to get home in this weather. My grandmother's waiting. Arthur reached into his coat. Then at least let me pay you. Jamal stepped back before Arthur could pull out his wallet. No, sir. Arthur paused. You carried my groceries 3 miles in a storm. Yes, sir. You missed your bus. I'll walk. You're soaked. I'll dry. Arthur looked at him carefully. Why won't you take the money? Jamal lowered his eyes for a second, then raised them again. His voice was quiet, but it did not shake. Because I didn't do it for money. If my grandma found out I charged an old man for helping him, she'd make me bring it back. Arthur's hand froze inside his coat. Something changed in his face then. The rich house, the iron gate, the porch lights, all of it seemed to fall away. For the first time, Arthur did not look like a stranger Jamal had helped. He looked like a lonely old man who had just been given something he had not known he needed. What's your address, Jamal? Arthur asked softly. In case I want to send your grandmother a thank you card. Jamal hesitated only long enough to wipe rain from his forehead. Then he gave the address. Apartment 4B, West Marlow Towers, South Side. Arthur wrote it on the back of a grocery receipt with a silver pen. You take care of yourself, Arthur said. Jamal nodded. You too, Mr. Arthur. And maybe next time call somebody before carrying 6 bags by yourself. A tiny smile touched Arthur's mouth. Maybe I will. Jamal turned and stepped back into the rain. He walked down the stone path, through the iron gate and onto Oakwood Lane, his shoes filled with cold water again. The bus was long gone. His stomach twisted with hunger. His hands burned from the weight of the bags that were no longer there. But he did not regret stopping. Not once. Behind him, Arthur Whitmore stood on the porch, holding the receipt with Jamal's address written across it. He watched the young man disappear into the wet glow of the streetlights. A thin black teenager in a torn jacket walking alone through a neighborhood that had never been built for boys like him. Arthur did not move until Jamal was gone. Then he looked down at the receipt again. Apartment 4B, West Marlow Towers. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with recognition. He knew that building. He owned that building. And suddenly, the rain felt much colder than before. Arthur Whitmore stood alone on his porch long after Jamal disappeared around the corner. The receipt in his hand had softened from the rain. Ink had begun to blur along the edges, but the address remained clear. West Marlow Towers, Apartment 4B. Arthur knew that building better than most people knew their own homes. He wished he didn't. For years, reports about West Marlow Towers had crossed his desk. Maintenance budgets, occupancy numbers, repair requests, tenant complaints. It was one of dozens of properties under Whitmore Holdings. Just another building. Just another line on a spreadsheet. Or at least, that was what he had told himself. The rain drummed softly against the porch roof. Arthur stared into the darkness where Jamal had vanished. The boy had carried 6 heavy grocery bags through a storm without asking for $1. Without asking for anything. Arthur could not remember the last time someone had done something for him without wanting something in return. Not since his wife. Not since his son. The thought settled heavily in his chest. Inside the house, a grandfather clock chimed 7 times. Arthur folded the receipt and slipped it into his pocket. Then he walked inside. The house was warm, quiet. Too quiet. The foyer stretched into polished hallways lined with framed photographs, family vacations, charity events, ribbon cuttings, success, achievement, recognition. Every wall displayed evidence of a life most people dreamed about, yet every room felt empty. Arthur passed a photograph near the staircase. A woman with bright eyes smiled at the camera. Beside her stood a teenage boy with Arthur's smile. His wife, Eleanor. His son, Michael. Gone. Both of them. A drunk driver had taken them 8 years earlier. The mansion had felt like a museum ever since. Arthur stopped, For a moment, he stared at the picture. Then his thoughts returned to Jamal. An 18-year-old kid carrying groceries in the rain. A kid who lived in one of Arthur's buildings. A kid who looked exhausted enough to collapse. A kid who somehow still believed in helping strangers. Arthur shook his head slowly. Something about it didn't sit right. He walked into his study. Mahogany shelves covered the walls. A fire crackled quietly in the stone fireplace. Arthur sat behind his desk and picked up his phone. After a few rings, a woman answered. Margaret Cole. Arthur looked down at the receipt. I need you to look into someone. There was a brief pause. Who? Jamal Carter. Margaret immediately recognized the tone in his voice. Not business. Personal. That almost never happened. What do you need? Everything. Arthur leaned back in his chair. Address is West Marlow Towers, apartment 4B. Another pause. I'll start tonight. Thank you. Arthur ended the call, but instead of returning to work, he sat quietly, staring into the fire. For reasons he couldn't explain, he hoped Margaret would find out he was wrong. He hoped Jamal was exaggerating. He hoped things weren't as difficult as they sounded, because if the boy had told the truth, Arthur wasn't sure he would like what that said about the empire he had spent 40 years building. Across the city, Jamal Carter finally reached home. The walk back felt twice as long. Rainwater soaked through his shoes. His stomach growled constantly. Streetlights reflected off puddles like broken mirrors. By the time he reached West Marlow Towers, his shoulders ached. The building looked even worse at night. Cracked brick, rust-stained windows, a flickering security light above the entrance. Half the letters on the sign had burned out years ago. Most people wouldn't have called it a home. Jamal did, because Gloria lived there, and wherever Gloria was, that was home. He climbed the 4 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken for nearly 3 months. Again. The landlord kept promising repairs. Nothing ever happened. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and old cooking oil. When Jamal reached apartment 4B, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. Warm yellow light greeted him, along with a familiar voice. There you are. Gloria Carter sat beside the window in her favorite chair. A blanket covered her legs. An oxygen monitor sat nearby. Her silver hair framed a tired but kind face. She smiled the moment she saw him. There he is, she said softly. Jamal smiled back. The tension in his shoulders eased instantly. Sorry I'm late. I noticed. You always do. She laughed. A small laugh. A fragile laugh. The kind that worried him more than coughing ever could. You got caught in the rain. A little. A little? She teased. You look like you swam home. Jamal chuckled. For a moment, things felt normal. Safe. Then Gloria noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. The smile faded. Tough day? Jamal hesitated. He never liked worrying her. But lying to Gloria was almost impossible. A guy needed help. What kind of help? He dropped his groceries. In the rain? Yep, Gloria nodded approvingly. Did you help him? Jamal smiled. You know I did. Her eyes softened. I know. She reached over and squeezed his hand. The skin on her fingers felt thinner than it used to. Jamal noticed. He always noticed. You did the right thing. The words warmed him more than any heater could have, because when Gloria said he had done the right thing, he believed it, no matter what anyone else thought. She studied him carefully. What aren't you telling me? Jamal laughed nervously. There it is. What? That face, what face? The face you make when you're carrying the weight of the world. He looked away, toward the kitchen, toward the stack of unpaid bills sitting beside the microwave, toward realities he wished he could hide forever. I'm okay. Jamal, he sighed. I just wish things were easier. Gloria nodded slowly. So do I. Silence settled between them. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Traffic hummed in the distance. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Gloria reached toward the table beside her chair. A small framed photograph sat there. Jamal as a child, missing front teeth, holding a basketball almost bigger than he was. You remember that day? She asked. Jamal smiled. The school tournament. You cried because your team lost. I was 10. You cried like somebody stole your dog. Jamal laughed. Gloria smiled. Then her expression grew thoughtful. You know what I remember? What? You stayed after everyone left. He frowned. Why? There was another boy. Slowly, the memory returned. A kid sitting alone on the bleachers, crying. His parents never showed up. Jamal nodded. I remember. You gave him your trophy. Jamal shrugged. He was upset. You loved that trophy. He needed it more. Gloria squeezed his hand again. That's who you've always been. Jamal looked down, embarrassed, but secretly proud. Because those words meant more than any trophy, more than money, more than recognition. Gloria leaned back carefully. You've got a good heart. I got it from you. She smiled. No. Her eyes glistened. You got it all on your own. Jamal swallowed hard. Moments like these scared him. Not because they were sad, because they reminded him how much he had to lose. The room suddenly felt smaller. The oxygen monitor seemed louder. Every breath Gloria took felt important, precious, temporary. He hated that thought. So he stood. How about I make dinner? Gloria laughed. With what? Jamal froze. The refrigerator wasn't exactly full. She already knew. Of course she knew. Grandmothers always knew. We have soup. We have half a can of soup. Still soup. Gloria shook her head. You're impossible. So I've been told. Together they shared the last can. 2 bowls. 1 package of crackers. Neither mentioned that it wasn't enough. Neither mentioned that rent was due. Neither mentioned the stack of medical bills. Sometimes survival depended on pretending tomorrow would work itself out. Later that night, after Gloria fell asleep in her chair, Jamal quietly covered her with another blanket. The television flickered silently in the corner. A weather forecast predicted more rain. Jamal walked into the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside were overdue notices, medical statements, past due utility warnings, numbers, always numbers. He stared at them, then pulled out his wallet. $6. That was all. 6. He sat at the table beneath the buzzing kitchen light. The same table where Gloria balanced bills every month. The same table where she always somehow found a way to keep going. Jamal lowered his head into his hands. For the first time all day, he allowed himself to feel tired. Really tired. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that came from trying to be strong for too long. The kind nobody noticed. The kind nobody applauded. He closed his eyes and whispered something he hoped nobody would ever hear. I don't know how much longer I can do this. The apartment remained silent. No answer came, only the distant hum of traffic. and the sound of Gloria breathing softly in the next room. Jamal opened his eyes again. He folded the bills, put them back in the envelope, then stood up. Tomorrow he would work. Tomorrow he would figure something out. Tomorrow he would keep going. Because that's what Gloria had taught him. Across the city, Margaret Cole's phone lit up with the first report on Jamal Carter. As she began reading, her expression slowly changed. Concern, then shock, then something very close to heartbreak. And before midnight, she knew one thing for certain. Arthur Whitmore had not met an ordinary young man in the rain. He had stumbled into a story much bigger than either of them realized. By 6 o'clock the next morning, Margaret Cole had already filled an entire folder. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee growing cold beside her laptop. The city outside her apartment was still waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled through downtown streets. Train horns echoed in the distance. The sky over Chicago remained the color of wet concrete. Margaret read through every report twice. Jamal Carter, age 18, South Side, Chicago. Dropped out of school at 16. No criminal record. No complaints. No disciplinary history. Nothing. The deeper she searched, the stranger it became. Most young men carrying that much responsibility left footprints somewhere. A fight, a suspension, an arrest, a mistake. But Jamal's record looked almost impossible. The only things people seemed to say about him were good. He volunteered. He worked. He helped neighbors. He carried groceries. Fixed broken furniture. Walked elderly residents upstairs when the elevator failed. Babysat children when parents worked night shifts. The boy practically disappeared every time someone thanked him. Margaret leaned back slowly. Then she opened one final file. Employment. Community kitchen of South Side. Part-time worker. 6 months. Supervisor. Frank Donnelly. Margaret frowned. The comments section contained only one sentence. Hard worker. Too soft-hearted. She stared at it, then smiled slightly. Arthur was going to find that interesting. Across town, Jamal was already awake. The apartment remained dark. Only the orange glow of a street lamp filtered through the curtains. He sat quietly beside Gloria's chair. She was still sleeping. Her breathing sounded uneven. Not alarming, but different. The kind of difference only someone who loved her would notice. Jamal checked the clock. 5:41 a.m. His shift started at 7. He stood carefully, moved to the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. Half a carton of milk, a few slices of bread, 1 apple. Nothing else. He closed the door. His stomach growled. He ignored it. The apple would stay for Gloria, like always. Jamal filled a glass of water instead, then slipped on his jacket. The same torn jacket, the same cracked shoes, the same quiet determination. Before leaving, he stopped beside Gloria, bent down, and kissed her forehead. She opened one eye. "You sneaking out on me?" He smiled. "Thought you were asleep." "You thought wrong. Go back to sleep." "You eat breakfast?" Jamal hesitated. That was enough. Grandmothers could detect a lie before it even formed. Gloria narrowed her eyes. "Jamal, I'll grab something later." "You better." "I will." "You promise?" He smiled. "I promise." She settled back into her chair, still unconvinced, but too tired to argue. Jamal stepped into the hallway. The smell of damp carpet greeted him. The elevator remained broken. A handwritten sign still hung across the doors. Out of order. 3 weeks old. Maybe 4. Nobody knew anymore. Jamal started down the stairs. 4 flights, same as every day. Outside, cold wind swept through the streets. The city was waking up. Bus engines, car horns, coffee shops opening, construction crews gathering around trucks. The rhythm of ordinary people trying to survive another day. Jamal walked 6 blocks before reaching the community kitchen. The building sat between a pawn shop and an auto repair garage. Nothing fancy, just red brick walls and a faded blue sign. But every day dozens of people came through those doors. Some needed food, some needed company, some simply needed someone to look them in the eye and remember they existed. Jamal understood that feeling better than most. Inside, the smell of coffee and soup filled the air. Steam rose from industrial-sized pots. Volunteers moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast. Frank Donnelly stood near the service counter, tall, broad-shouldered, perpetually irritated. He looked like someone who had spent 20 years arguing with life and lost every round. The moment he saw Jamal, his expression darkened. "You're late." Jamal checked the clock. 6:58. "I'm early." "Not early enough." Frank shoved a box of napkins toward him. "Dining room needs setting." "Yes, sir." Jamal took the box. No argument. No complaint. That was another thing people noticed about him. He didn't waste energy fighting battles that didn't matter. By 8 o'clock, the dining room was full. Elderly residents, veterans, single parents, people sleeping in shelters, people sleeping nowhere. The line stretched almost to the entrance. Jamal moved between tables carrying trays and coffee cups, smiling, listening, helping. Mrs. Henderson sat near the window, 78 years old, arthritis, always complained about the weather. "Looks like rain again," she grumbled. Jamal refilled her coffee. "This is Chicago. That's basically the forecast every day." She laughed. "Smart mouth. You still coming tomorrow?" "Long as the Lord keeps waking me up. Then I'll save your favorite table." Her smile softened. Moments like that mattered, more than most people realized. Across the room, a little girl sat alone beside her mother. Maybe 6 years old, maybe 7. The child stared at the tray in front of her. Empty. Her mother looked exhausted, eyes red, clothes wrinkled, the look of someone carrying too much. Jamal noticed immediately. He always noticed. A few minutes later, he disappeared into the kitchen, returned with a warm roll, then another, and an apple. The same apple he had saved from home. He placed them gently on the girl's tray. Her eyes widened. "Is this for me?" Jamal nodded. "Breakfast is important." The little girl smiled. A real smile. The kind that transformed an entire face. Her mother looked like she might cry. "Thank you," she whispered. Jamal simply nodded, then walked away before either could say more. Unfortunately, Frank saw everything. The manager's face darkened instantly. Jamal. The room grew quieter. Several volunteers glanced over. Jamal stopped. "Yes, sir?" Frank pointed toward the tray. "What was that?" "She was hungry." "That's not what I asked." The little girl lowered her eyes. Her mother stiffened. Jamal remained calm. She didn't have enough food. Frank folded his arms. "Did she have a voucher?" "No." "Then why did you give her extra?" The room felt smaller. The kind of silence that comes when people know something unfair is happening, but aren't sure how to stop it. Jamal looked at the child, then back at Frank. "Because she was hungry." Frank threw his hands up. "There it is again!" "What? You always think you're running this place." Jamal blinked. "No, sir. Rules exist for a reason." The little girl looked terrified now. Her mother pulled her closer. Several customers pretended not to listen, but everyone listened. Frank stepped closer. "You keep giving away food like this. We'll have nothing left." Jamal spoke quietly. "We always have leftovers." Frank's jaw tightened. Wrong answer. Everyone knew it. The manager pointed toward the kitchen. "My office, now." Jamal followed without protest. Inside the cramped office, Frank shut the door. The noise of the dining room disappeared. Only the hum of an old refrigerator remained. Frank rubbed his forehead. "You know why you're impossible?" Jamal stayed silent. "Because you're a good kid." That surprised him. Frank rarely gave compliments. The older man sighed heavily. "You see every sad story in this city and try to fix it." Jamal looked down. "Somebody should." Frank laughed bitterly. "That's exactly the problem." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Frank sat down, suddenly looking older than usual, more tired. "You know what happens to people who try saving everybody?" Jamal shook his head. "They break." The words lingered. Frank stared out the office window. "You can't carry the whole world." Jamal thought about Gloria, the rent, the medicine, the empty refrigerator, the old man in the rain. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe he couldn't. But he still couldn't walk away when someone needed help. "I'll be more careful," Jamal said. Frank sighed. "Just get back to work." The lecture was over. But something about it stayed with Jamal. As he returned to the dining room, he noticed the little girl watching him. She waved. Tiny fingers. Big smile. Jamal waved back. And somehow the entire argument felt worth it. Outside, across the street, a black sedan sat parked beside the curb. Margaret Cole lowered a pair of reading glasses. She had spent nearly an hour watching through the window, watching Jamal work, watching him help, watching him give away his own apple. The report hadn't exaggerated. If anything, it had left things out. Margaret picked up her phone. Arthur answered immediately. "Well?" She looked through the glass again. Jamal was helping an elderly man carry a tray, just because he noticed the man's hands shaking. Margaret smiled. "Arthur." She paused, then said the one thing she never expected to say. "I think this young man might be exactly who you believe he is." Arthur remained silent, listening, waiting. Margaret watched Jamal disappear back into the kitchen, and for the first time, she wondered whether one rainy afternoon might end up changing far more than one life. Because somewhere inside Whitmore Holdings, people were already beginning to ask questions. Questions about West Marlow Towers. Questions about repairs. Questions about management. Questions that one man in particular would soon wish nobody had asked. His name was Richard Kane, and he had no idea that trouble was already heading straight toward him. At that exact moment, Richard sat inside a cramped management office on the ground floor of West Marlow Towers. The office smelled like stale coffee and old paper. A space heater rattled in the corner. Stacks of maintenance requests sat piled on his desk, most of them unopened. A leaking ceiling and Building BA broken hallway light. A disabled tenant requesting handrails. 3 complaints about the elevator. Another complaint about the elevator. And another. Richard didn't bother reading them. He simply stamped most of them with the same red mark. Pending. Then shoved them into a drawer. Out of sight. Out of mind. That had been his system for years. It worked. Or at least it had worked so far. He leaned back in his chair and glanced through the blinds toward the parking lot. Rainwater still sat in puddles from yesterday's storm. The old apartment complex looked tired. just like the people who lived there. Richard never saw families, never saw struggles, never saw people. Only numbers. Rent collected. Rent overdue. Maintenance costs. Profit margins. The phone on his desk rang. He picked it up, West Marlow Management. A nervous voice answered. Mr. Kane. Corporate requested copies of repair records. Richard frowned. What records? The elevator. Silence. A strange silence. Then Richard laughed. Why? I don't know, sir. Who asked? The request came from Whitmore Holdings downtown. Richard's smile faded. Who exactly? The employee checked. Margaret Cole's office. Richard sat up for the first time all morning. Margaret Cole. That name mattered. Margaret worked directly for Arthur Whitmore. Requests from her office rarely happened, and when they did, somebody usually lost their job. Richard's stomach tightened. Send me the email. The line disconnected. A few seconds later, his computer chimed. Richard opened the message. Read it once, then again. Request all maintenance reports related to West Marlow Towers, including repair history, tenant complaints, elevator documentation, safety inspections. He stared at the screen. The heater suddenly felt too warm. Because there was one problem. Actually, several problems. The elevator budget had been approved months ago. The repairs should have been completed. The money had been allocated. The invoices existed. The paperwork looked clean. But the repairs themselves had never happened. Richard swallowed. Hard. Meanwhile, several miles away, Jamal's shift finally ended. The afternoon sky remained gray. Cold wind swept through the city. Jamal stepped outside the community kitchen and pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders. His body felt tired. Not unusual tired. The kind of tired that lived in his bones. He checked his phone. 2 missed calls. 1 voicemail. His stomach immediately tightened. The voicemail was from Gloria. He called back before even listening. She answered on the second ring. Hey, baby. Relief flooded through him. You okay? I'm fine. You called twice, I know. What happened? A small laugh came through the phone. I couldn't remember if I took my afternoon medication. Jamal smiled despite himself. You did. You sure? I put it right beside your tea. Oh. A pause. Then I guess I did. Jamal shook his head. What would you do without me? Probably get into trouble. Definitely. That earned another laugh. The sound warmed him. For a moment. Then Gloria coughed. A deep cough. Longer than usual. Jamal's smile disappeared. You okay? I'm fine. Another cough. I'm serious. I'm fine, baby. But he knew that voice. She wasn't fine. The call ended a few minutes later, and the worry stayed with him. He started walking home. Traffic rolled past. A train thundered overhead. Neon signs flickered to life as evening approached. The city moved around him, busy, loud, unstoppable. Yet Jamal could think only about Gloria. And money. Always money. Medicine, rent, food, bills. Every road seemed to lead back to those same problems. As he crossed Franklin Avenue, a black sedan slowed beside the curb. The passenger window lowered. Margaret Cole sat inside. Jamal stopped. Confused. Can I help you, ma'am? Margaret smiled politely. You must be Jamal Carter. His guard immediately went up. Years of experience taught him that strangers usually wanted something. "Who are you?" "My name is Margaret." Technically true. She left out the rest. "I'm a friend of Arthur Whitmore." Jamal blinked. "The old man from yesterday?" "The very same." A small smile appeared on his face. "How's he doing?" Margaret noticed something immediately. Not excitement. Not curiosity about money. Not questions about Arthur's house. The first thing Jamal asked was whether Arthur was okay. "Interesting. He's doing well." "Good." Margaret studied him. The torn jacket, the worn shoes, the exhaustion in his eyes. Everything Arthur described was true. "Mr. Whitmore wanted me to thank you again." Jamal shrugged. "No need. He insists." "I'm glad he's okay." Margaret smiled. The boy wasn't performing, wasn't pretending. He genuinely meant it. That was becoming increasingly rare. "Can I give you a ride home?" Jamal shook his head. "No, thank you. It's cold. I walk every day. It's no trouble." Again he shook his head. "Really, I'm good." Margaret found herself smiling. Arthur was right. The young man seemed almost allergic to accepting help. "All right." She reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and handed it over. "If you ever need anything, call me." Jamal looked at the card, then looked back at her. Why? The question caught her off guard. Most people would have immediately accepted, maybe even asked for favors. Jamal genuinely wanted to know. Margaret answered honestly, "Because there aren't enough people like you." For a second, he didn't know what to say. Then he smiled awkwardly. "Thank you." She nodded. The sedan pulled away, leaving Jamal standing on the sidewalk, holding the card, confused, curious, and completely unaware that Arthur Whitmore was already thinking about him far more than he realized. That evening, Arthur sat in his study reading Margaret's report. Page after page, story after story, everything pointed to the same conclusion. Jamal Carter was exactly who he appeared to be, and somehow that bothered Arthur. Not because he doubted Jamal, because he doubted himself. He turned another page. A maintenance complaint from West Marlow Towers. Broken elevator. Unresolved. 4 months. Another complaint. Leaking pipes. Unresolved. Another. Heating failure. Unresolved. Arthur frowned. Then another document caught his attention. A resident statement. An elderly tenant injured while climbing stairs during an elevator outage. Arthur sat very still. His fingers tightened around the paper. Because suddenly he wasn't thinking about spreadsheets anymore. He was thinking about Gloria, a woman with heart problems, living on the 4th floor, climbing stairs, every day. Something cold settled in his chest. He picked up the phone, called Margaret immediately. She answered after one ring. "Arthur? Get me every file on West Marlow Towers." A pause. "I already started." "Good." His voice hardened. "Something isn't right." Margaret leaned forward. "What did you find?" Arthur stared at the maintenance reports, at the ignored complaints, at the names, at the dates, at the evidence. "I think somebody has been lying." Across town, Gloria Carter sat beside the apartment window watching the streetlights flicker on. The city looked beautiful from a distance. Soft, golden, peaceful, the kind of beauty that hid hardship. She heard Jamal unlocking the door, immediately smiled. He stepped inside, trying to look cheerful, trying not to look worried, trying and failing, because Gloria knew him too well. "Bad day?" Jamal hesitated. Not really. She raised one eyebrow. That grandmother eyebrow. The one that could detect lies through walls. He laughed. A strange day. What happened? Jamal sat beside her, then told her everything. The grocery store, Arthur, the mansion, the assistant, the business card. Gloria listened carefully, without interrupting. When he finished, she stared out the window, thoughtful. Sounds like that old man was lonely. Jamal blinked. That's your takeaway? She smiled. People with everything are often lonely. Jamal considered that. Arthur had looked lonely, standing in the rain, holding 6 grocery bags by himself, like nobody was coming, like nobody ever came. Gloria nodded slowly. Maybe you helped more than you realize. Jamal looked toward the darkening city, toward Oakwood Lane, somewhere beyond the skyline, toward a man he barely knew. A strange feeling settled inside him, like his life had somehow brushed against something important, something unfinished. He didn't know why, but he couldn't shake the feeling. Outside, clouds gathered again over Chicago, and far across the city, Richard Kane sat alone in his office staring at a growing stack of corporate requests. For the first time in years, he felt afraid. Because someone at Whitmore Holdings had started pulling on a thread, and if they kept pulling long enough, everything he had spent years hiding would eventually come loose. Richard Kane sat motionless in his office. Outside his window, evening settled over West Marlowe Towers. A broken streetlight flickered in the parking lot. The elevator remained dead. The same elevator residents had complained about for months. The same elevator corporate was suddenly asking questions about. Richard loosened his tie. For the first time in years, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. His phone buzzed. Another email from Whitmore Holdings. Another request. Another audit. Another reminder that someone important was paying attention. He stared at the screen, then slowly deleted 3 maintenance files from his desktop. Not enough. He knew it wasn't enough. But panic made people do foolish things. And Richard Kane was beginning to panic. Across the city, Jamal Carter had no idea any of this was happening. He sat beside Gloria's chair watching an old game show play quietly on television. For a little while, life felt normal. The apartment was small, the furniture was worn, the refrigerator was nearly empty. But Gloria was smiling, and that was enough, until she suddenly pressed a hand against her chest. The smile vanished. Jamal sat upright. "Grandma? I'm okay." But she wasn't. Her breathing had changed. The color had drained from her face. A thin layer of sweat appeared across her forehead. Jamal immediately knelt beside her. "Grandma." She tried to answer. Another sharp breath interrupted her. Fear shot through him, the kind of fear that arrives instantly, the kind that makes the world narrow. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "We can't afford." "I don't care." Another breath. Another pause. Another look that terrified him. Jamal grabbed his phone. His hands were shaking. Within minutes, flashing lights reflected through the apartment window. Neighbors opened doors. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Paramedics rushed inside. Questions, equipment, urgent voices. Everything happened too fast. One moment Gloria was sitting beside the window. The next, she was being wheeled toward an ambulance. Jamal climbed inside beside her. Rain began falling again, soft at first, then harder. The siren wailed through the night. Chicago blurred beyond the windows. Red lights, wet streets, headlights streaking through darkness. Jamal held Gloria's hand the entire ride, trying not to imagine life without her, trying not to imagine being alone, trying not to imagine all the things he had spent years refusing to think about. Greenfield Medical Center glowed beneath floodlights when they arrived. Doctors moved quickly. Nurses asked questions. Machines beeped. Forms appeared. Gloria disappeared through a set of double doors. Then Jamal was alone, just like that. He sat in a waiting room beneath fluorescent lights. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Every minute felt longer than the last. Families sat nearby. A television played muted news. A janitor pushed a mop across the floor. Life continued. But for Jamal, time seemed frozen. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, a doctor approached. A woman in blue scrubs, kind eyes, tired expression. Jamal Carter? He stood immediately. Yes. The doctor guided him toward a quiet corner. Your grandmother is stable right now. Relief rushed through him. For exactly 1 second. Then he noticed the doctor's face, the hesitation, the concern, and his stomach dropped. What's wrong? The doctor folded her hands. Your grandmother's heart condition has progressed faster than we expected. Jamal felt the floor tilt beneath him. We've been monitoring her for some time. He swallowed. Can you help her? The doctor nodded slowly. Yes. Hope flickered. Then she continued. But she needs surgery. The hope froze. What kind of surgery? A valve replacement. Silence. Hospital sounds echoed around them. Footsteps, voices, monitor alarms somewhere far away. Everything suddenly felt distant. How soon? The doctor looked directly at him. As soon as possible. How soon is that? The answer came quietly. 72 hours. Jamal stared at her. 3 days. 3 days to save the only family he had left. Okay. His voice sounded strange. Small. What does it cost? The doctor's expression softened. Because she already knew what came next. She had delivered this conversation before, many times. Never easily. The procedure, hospitalization, medication, recovery care. She paused, then said the number. $92,000. Jamal didn't react, at least not immediately, because his mind couldn't process it. 92,000. The number felt unreal, like hearing the distance to another planet. He thought about his wallet. $6. He thought about the apartment, the unpaid bills, the empty refrigerator, the broken elevator, the overdue rent. $92,000. The doctor kept speaking. Payment plans, financial assistance, insurance limitations, resources, programs. Words floated past him, meaningless. All he heard was the number, 92,000. Finally, she stopped. Do you have any questions? Jamal stared at the floor, then asked the only question that mattered. What happens if I can't get it? The doctor's silence answered first. Then came the words, without surgery, her condition will continue to worsen. Jamal closed his eyes. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The waiting room suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too cold. The doctor placed a hand gently on his shoulder. I'm sorry. Then she walked away, leaving him alone with a number bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Hours later, Jamal finally entered Gloria's room. Machines hummed softly. The city lights glowed beyond the hospital window. Gloria looked smaller in the hospital bed, more fragile. Yet when she saw him, she smiled. The same smile she always gave him. The smile that had carried him through childhood. Hey, baby. His eyes immediately filled. He looked away before she noticed. You scared me. You scare easy. He laughed weakly. No, I don't. You do. She reached for his hand. He took it, held it carefully, like something precious. Because it was. Doctor talked to you? Jamal nodded. Gloria sighed. I figured. For a while, neither spoke. The city glowed outside. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Finally, Gloria squeezed his hand. You don't look at me like that. Like what? Like I'm leaving. His throat tightened. Grandma? No. Her voice remained gentle. But listen to me. Jamal looked up. You've spent your whole life taking care of everybody else. She smiled. Even old men in grocery store parking lots. Despite everything, he laughed. A small laugh. A painful laugh. Gloria smiled too. Then her eyes softened. If something happens to me. No, Jamal. No. She squeezed his hand again, stronger than he expected. You listen. He lowered his eyes, because he couldn't bear hearing it. Gloria waited, then spoke quietly. The world is hard. A pause. But don't let it make you hard too. Tears burned behind his eyes. You hear me? He nodded. Good. Outside the room, a nurse walked past carrying paperwork. Inside, machines continued their steady rhythm. Life, time, hope, still moving, still fighting. Jamal looked at Gloria, then at the city beyond the window, then at the $6 still folded inside his wallet. 72 hours. $92,000. And absolutely no idea where to begin. What he didn't know was that somewhere across Chicago, Arthur Whitmore had just finished reading the hospital report Margaret placed on his desk. And for the first time in many years, the billionaire felt his heart break for someone he barely knew. Arthur Whitmore sat alone in his study. The hospital report lay open on the desk before him. $92,000, 72 hours. The numbers meant almost nothing to him financially. He had spent more than that renovating a conference room, more than that replacing artwork in a corporate lobby. Yet somewhere across Chicago, those same numbers stood between a grandmother and her future, between a young man and the only family he had left. Arthur stared through the rain-speckled window. He remembered another hospital room, another impossible conversation, another doctor delivering news that changed everything. For years, he had convinced himself that work could fill the silence. Buildings, meetings, acquisitions, numbers. None of it had worked. And now a young man in worn-out shoes had somehow reminded him what mattered. His phone buzzed. Margaret. Arthur answered immediately. Tell me he's not alone. There was a pause. I'm afraid he is. Arthur closed his eyes. What's he doing? Still at the hospital. Has anyone offered help? No. Arthur leaned back slowly. The fire crackled beside him. Outside, rain slid down the glass. Inside, an uncomfortable feeling settled over him. Guilt. Because West Marlowe Towers belonged to him. Because Gloria Carter had spent months climbing 4 flights of stairs with a failing heart inside one of his buildings. Because somewhere between success and expansion, he had stopped looking closely enough. Keep watching, Arthur said quietly. Margaret understood immediately. You want daily updates? No. Arthur looked again at the report. Hourly. Across the city, Jamal sat beside Gloria's bed. Morning sunlight filtered through hospital blinds. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Machines hummed softly. Nurses moved in and out. The world continued. But Jamal felt trapped inside a countdown. 72 hours. Every glance at the clock made it worse. Gloria was asleep. For now. Peaceful. Fragile. Jamal sat in a plastic chair and stared at a notebook. Inside were numbers, phone numbers, organizations, churches, community centers, charities, names of anyone who might help. He had spent half the night making the list. Now he intended to call every single one. His first call lasted 3 minutes. The second lasted 4. The third ended after less than 60 seconds. The answers sounded different, but meant the same thing. No. No available emergency funds. No immediate assistance. No guaranteed approval. No available resources within 72 hours. By noon, Jamal had made 21 calls. Nothing. Not a single dollar. Not a single solution. He stood beside a vending machine in the hallway and pressed his forehead against the cool metal. Exhaustion settled into his shoulders. Not physical exhaustion. The kind that came from watching doors close one after another. A nurse passed by. "Everything okay?" Jamal forced a smile. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded and continued walking. The lie tasted bitter. Nothing was okay. His phone buzzed. A text message from Frank. "You coming to work today?" Jamal stared at the screen. He needed the job. Every hour mattered. Every dollar mattered. Yet the thought of leaving Gloria made his chest tighten. He texted back. "At the hospital, Grandma's condition got worse." The response came almost immediately. "Take today." Jamal blinked. That surprised him. A second message followed. "Don't make me regret being nice." For the first time all day, Jamal smiled. A small smile, but real. Later that afternoon, he left the hospital. Not because he wanted to. Because he needed money. Any money. The rain had finally stopped. Cold wind swept through the streets. Clouds drifted above the skyline. Chicago looked washed clean. Jamal walked toward West Marlowe Towers. The city felt different now. Every building seemed expensive. Every passing car seemed out of reach. Every person looked like they had somewhere to go. Something to do, a future. He wondered what that felt like. When he reached the apartment complex, several neighbors were sitting outside. Mrs. Alvarez from 3C, Mr. Jenkins from 2A, old Mrs. Dawson from across the hall. They immediately stood when they saw him. "How's your grandmother?" Mrs. Dawson asked. Jamal hesitated, then told them the truth. Within minutes, word spread through the building. People gathered. Residents came out of apartments. Workers returning from shifts stopped to listen. A few children sat quietly on the steps. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. When Jamal finished explaining the surgery, silence settled over the courtyard. Then Mrs. Dawson reached into her purse, pulled out a $10 bill, and placed it in his hand. "It ain't much." Jamal immediately shook his head. "No, ma'am." "You take it." "I can't." "Yes, you can." Her voice cracked slightly. "Your grandmother watched my boys when I worked nights." She pushed the money back toward him. "Now let us help." Mr. Jenkins stepped forward next. $20. Then Mrs. Alvarez. 15. Then another neighbor. And another. And another. One little boy ran upstairs and returned carrying a plastic piggy bank. He dumped coins into Jamal's hands. Pennies, nickels, dimes. Every coin rattled against the others. "My grandma says it all counts." Jamal felt tears burning behind his eyes. He quickly looked away. The courtyard blurred. Not because the amount was large, because these people had almost nothing. Yet they were giving anyway. Just like Gloria always had. By sunset, Jamal sat alone on a hospital bench counting everything. Bills, coins, wrinkled dollar notes, carefully folded 20s, a handwritten check from a retired bus driver. He counted twice, then a third time. $538. He stared at the total. 538 against 92,000. The gap felt endless. For the first time since Gloria entered the hospital, hopelessness truly found him. The evening sky darkened. Hospital lights flickered on. Cars moved through the parking lot. Families came and went. Life continued. Jamal remained seated. The money rested in his lap. $538. Proof that people cared. Proof that kindness existed. Proof that love survived even in poor places. Yet it still wasn't enough. Not even close. A black sedan sat quietly across the parking lot. Engine off. Lights dark. Margaret Cole watched from inside. She had witnessed everything. The neighbors. The donations. The little boy's piggy bank. The tears Jamal tried to hide. She picked up her phone. Arthur answered on the first ring. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret said softly, "He's trying." Arthur looked out at his study window. "How much did he raise?" Margaret glanced toward the bench. $538. Silence. Long silence. Finally, Arthur asked, "And what did he do after he counted it?" Margaret watched Jamal carefully. The young man folded every bill, every coin, placed them back into the envelope, then stood up. Not celebrating, not complaining, just preparing to keep going. "He got back up," she said quietly. Arthur closed his eyes, because somehow that answer hurt the most. A young man carrying the weight of the world, and still refusing to quit. Meanwhile, several miles away, Richard Kane sat inside his office reviewing financial records. The corporate audit had intensified. Requests were multiplying. Questions were becoming specific. Dangerously specific. He opened a tenant file, then froze. Apartment 4B, Gloria Carter, Jamal Carter. Richard stared at the names. Something clicked. Something unpleasant. A memory surfaced. The young black kid who always paid rent late but always paid eventually. The grandmother with health problems. The family living on the 4th floor. Richard suddenly remembered hearing another name that morning. Arthur Whitmore. And for the first time, he began to wonder whether those names might somehow be connected. The realization sent a chill through him. Because if they were connected, everything was about to change. Richard Kane spent most of the night staring at the tenant file. Apartment 4B, Gloria Carter, Jamal Carter. The names refused to leave his mind. At first he told himself it was nothing, just another tenant, just another family struggling to pay rent, just another file. But then he remembered the call from corporate, the audit, the sudden interest from Margaret Cole, the questions about West Marlowe Towers, and now Arthur Whitmore's name had somehow entered the picture. Richard felt a knot forming in his stomach, because people like Arthur Whitmore didn't notice people like Jamal Carter. Not usually. And if Arthur had noticed him, there had to be a reason. Richard shut the file, but sleep never came. Across the city, dawn arrived quietly. The rain had finally stopped. Golden sunlight spilled between downtown skyscrapers. For the first time in days, Chicago looked almost peaceful. Jamal stood beside Gloria's hospital bed, holding a paper cup of coffee he couldn't afford. He hadn't slept. His eyes burned. His back ached. His thoughts felt heavy. But none of that mattered. Gloria was awake and smiling. "That coffee smells terrible." Jamal laughed softly. "It probably is. Then why are you drinking it? Because hospital coffee is somehow cheaper than everything else. She smiled, then studied him carefully. That grandmother look again, the one that saw through every mask. You haven't slept. I'm okay. Liar. He looked away. Gloria sighed. You can't carry this all by yourself. Jamal stared at the city beyond the window. I know. But he didn't. Not really. Because carrying everything was all he had ever known. The bills, the rent, the medicine, the responsibility, the fear. He had carried it for so long he no longer remembered what life felt like without it. A knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by a hospital social worker, a woman named Karen. Kind eyes, professional smile. The kind of person who delivered hope carefully because she knew how fragile it could be. Karen sat across from Jamal. We've reviewed several assistance options. His heart immediately lifted, then fell again when she continued. Unfortunately, most emergency grants require approval periods longer than 72 hours. There it was, another door closing. Karen handed him a folder. There are still organizations you can contact. Jamal accepted it, though both of them knew the truth. He had already called most of them. Karen hesitated, then lowered her voice. I'm sorry. Jamal smiled politely. The same smile people used when they didn't want strangers seeing how much something hurt. Thank you. Karen left. The room grew quiet again. Gloria reached for his hand. He squeezed hers gently. Neither spoke, because there wasn't anything left to say. Several miles away, Arthur Whitmore sat in the rear seat of a black sedan. Margaret sat across from him. The city moved past the windows. Traffic, pedestrians, construction crews, ordinary lives. Arthur barely noticed. His attention remained on the report in his lap. Every page brought another surprise. Another example of Jamal helping someone. A neighbor whose groceries he carried upstairs. An elderly resident whose heater he repaired. Children he tutored after school before dropping out. Food he shared when he barely had enough himself. Arthur turned another page, then another. Finally, he looked up. How old is he again? 18. Arthur stared out the window. 18. The word sounded almost unbelievable. At 18, Arthur had been worried about college exams, business dreams, career plans, not keeping a grandmother alive, not feeding an entire apartment building, not carrying responsibilities meant for people twice his age. Margaret watched him quietly. She knew what he was thinking, because she was thinking the same thing. Life had never been fair to Jamal Carter, yet somehow it hadn't made him bitter. That was the remarkable part. The sedan slowed. Arthur looked outside. They had arrived at West Marlow Towers. For a long moment, neither moved. Arthur simply stared. The building looked worse in person. Cracked concrete, peeling paint, broken lights, neglected landscaping. The kind of property executives discussed using percentages and maintenance budgets, not human lives. Arthur slowly stepped out. The morning air felt cold. He looked up toward the fourth floor, toward apartment 4B, toward the place Jamal called home. A strange feeling settled over him. Regret. Not because he owned the building, because he had stopped paying attention. A maintenance worker noticed him, immediately froze, then hurried over. Mr. Whitmore? Arthur nodded. The man's eyes widened. Most employees never met Arthur in person. What happened to the elevator? Arthur asked. The worker looked uncomfortable. Still broken. For how long? A pause. Almost 4 months. Arthur felt his jaw tighten. And nobody fixed it? The worker hesitated, then quietly answered. The repairs were approved. Arthur slowly turned toward him. What does that mean? The worker looked around nervously, like someone afraid of being overheard. It means the money came through. Arthur said nothing. The worker swallowed, but the repairs never happened. Silence. Long silence. Then Arthur looked toward the building again, toward the 4th floor, toward Gloria climbing those stairs, toward Jamal carrying groceries, toward months of neglect. Something hardened behind his eyes. Margaret noticed immediately. So did the worker. Arthur Whitmore wasn't angry often, but when he was, people remembered it. Back at the hospital, Jamal sat in the cafeteria reviewing the list Karen had given him. 32 organizations, 32 possibilities, 32 chances. Or so he told himself. By lunchtime, he had contacted 12. Nothing. By 2 o'clock, he had contacted 20. Nothing. By 4 o'clock, his voice sounded tired even to him. Still nothing. The sun was beginning to set when he finally lowered his phone. The envelope of donations remained beside him. $538. The number seemed almost mocking now, a reminder of how impossible 92,000 truly was. He rubbed his eyes, then heard a familiar voice. Jamal? He looked up. Frank stood beside the table, holding a paper bag. For a moment, Jamal thought he was imagining things. Frank? The older man shrugged awkwardly. You weren't answering texts. I've been busy. No kidding. Frank set the paper bag down. What's this, dinner? Jamal blinked. Inside sat a turkey sandwich, fruit, a bottle of water, and 2 cookies. His throat tightened immediately. Frank, don't make it weird. The older man sat down across from him. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Frank looked around the cafeteria, then back at Jamal. How bad is it? Jamal stared at the table. He considered lying, then decided he was too tired. 92,000. Frank whistled softly. Wow. Yeah. Silence. Then Frank reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table. Jamal frowned. What's this? Take it. I can't. Yes, you can. Frank pushed it closer. Inside were several $100s. Not enough, but enough to matter, enough to hurt. Because people didn't give money like that unless they cared. Jamal stared at it. Speechless, Frank shrugged. The staff pitched in. Jamal looked up. The staff? Turns out people like you. A laugh escaped him. Despite everything, despite the fear, the exhaustion, the impossible situation. He laughed. Frank smiled. There he is. For the first time in days, hope flickered. Small, fragile, but real. Neither man noticed the black sedan parked outside the hospital. Arthur Whitmore sat inside, watching. Not because he wanted to spy, because he wanted to understand. And what he saw only confirmed what every report already said. Jamal Carter never asked anyone for anything. People simply wanted to help him. That realization stayed with Arthur long after the cafeteria lights glowed behind them, because it reminded him of someone he hadn't thought about in years, his son. And suddenly, the resemblance felt impossible to ignore. That night, as the city lights reflected across Lake Michigan, Arthur made a decision. A decision that would change everything. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. He picked up his phone, called Margaret. She answered immediately. Arthur? His voice remained calm, but there was certainty in it now. The kind that moved companies. The kind that changed lives. I want a meeting. With who? Jamal Carter. Margaret smiled. She had been waiting for those words. When? Arthur looked toward the hospital, toward the young man who had carried 6 grocery bags through a storm without expecting anything in return. Tomorrow morning. Then he paused and added quietly, It's time he learns who I really am. Margaret looked through the windshield toward the glowing hospital windows. For a moment, neither she nor Arthur spoke. The city moved around them. Traffic lights changed. Cars rolled past. Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. But inside the sedan, everything felt still. Arthur Whitmore kept watching the hospital entrance, watching the place where Jamal Carter had spent the last 3 days fighting a battle no 18-year-old should ever have to fight. He isn't going to ask for help, Margaret said finally. I know. He'll probably refuse it. Arthur nodded. I know that too. Margaret smiled faintly. Then this should be interesting. A small smile appeared on Arthur's face, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in years. The following morning arrived cold and bright. Sunlight reflected off glass towers downtown. Chicago looked clean after days of rain. At Greenfield Medical Center, Jamal woke in a waiting room chair. His neck hurt. His back hurt. His phone battery was nearly dead. For a few seconds, he forgot where he was. Then reality returned. 72 hours. $92,000. Grandma Gloria. The surgery. The fear. Everything rushed back at once. He rubbed his eyes and checked the time. 8:14 a.m. A nurse approached carrying a clipboard. Mr. Carter? Jamal stood immediately. His heart jumped. Is my grandmother okay? She's resting. Relief, brief but powerful. Then the nurse handed him an envelope. This was left for you. Jamal frowned. For me? The nurse nodded. No return address. She walked away. Jamal stared at the envelope. Simple white paper. His name written neatly across the front. Nothing else. He opened it carefully. Inside was a card. One sentence. 742 Oakwood Lane, 10 a.m. Please come. A friend. Jamal stared at the words. He knew that address. Arthur's house. His pulse quickened. For several seconds, he simply stood there, confused, curious, unsure. Then he slipped the card into his pocket, because deep down, he already knew he was going. By 9:20, he was on a bus headed toward Oakwood Lane. The ride felt longer than before, maybe because this time he wasn't carrying groceries. He was carrying questions. The neighborhoods gradually changed outside the windows. The streets became cleaner. The homes became larger. The lawns became greener. Every mile felt like crossing into a different world. By 9:52, Jamal stood outside the iron gate, the same gate he had walked through in the rain. The same house, the same ivy-covered brick walls. But everything felt different now, because this time he wasn't arriving as a stranger helping an old man. He was arriving because he had been invited. The gate opened before he touched it. A voice came through the intercom. Come in, Jamal. Margaret. He followed the stone pathway toward the front door. His worn shoes clicked softly against the pavement. The door opened. Margaret greeted him with a warm smile. Good morning. Morning. She stepped aside. Arthur is waiting for you. Jamal entered. The house felt even larger than he remembered. High ceilings, tall windows, bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling, paintings, photographs, a life displayed across decades. His eyes drifted toward one picture on the mantel. A younger Arthur, a woman beside him, a teenage boy between them, all smiling, happy, whole. Something about the photo made the house feel less intimidating, more human. Jamal. Arthur's voice pulled him back. The old man stood near the fireplace. Today he looked stronger, cleaner, more confident. Not like the frail figure struggling in the grocery store parking lot. Yet his eyes remained the same. Kind, thoughtful. Jamal smiled. Mr. Arthur. Arthur chuckled. Please sit. Jamal obeyed. A leather chair swallowed him whole. Margaret quietly placed coffee on the table, then moved toward the far side of the room. Arthur sat opposite him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Arthur leaned forward. I owe you an apology. Jamal blinked. For what? For not telling you who I am. Confusion crossed Jamal's face. Arthur smiled faintly, then gestured toward a framed newspaper hanging on the wall. Jamal followed his hand. His eyes widened. The headline filled half the page. Whitmore Holdings opens new community center. Beneath it stood Arthur, much younger, standing beside politicians and business leaders. Jamal looked back at him, then toward another photograph, then another. Slowly, realization began forming. His eyes widened further. You... Arthur nodded. Yes. The Arthur Whitmore? Another nod. Jamal sat back in stunned silence, because suddenly pieces started connecting. The house, the neighborhood, Margaret, the corporate name on construction signs throughout the city, the buildings, the headlines, the stories. Arthur Whitmore wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most influential businessmen in Illinois, and Jamal had spent 3 miles talking to him like he was just another lonely old man. Arthur smiled. You seem disappointed. That broke the tension. Jamal laughed. No, sir. Good. Just surprised. Most people are. Silence settled again. Comfortable this time. Then Arthur became serious. I asked you here because I learned about your grandmother. Jamal's smile faded. The reality returned instantly. Arthur noticed. He continued carefully. I know about the surgery. Jamal lowered his eyes. And I know about the $92,000. The room grew quiet. A clock ticked somewhere nearby. Outside, wind stirred leaves across the lawn. Arthur watched the young man sitting across from him. The exhaustion, the worry, the determination, everything he had seen in the reports, everything Margaret had described, everything he had witnessed himself. It was all real. Finally, Arthur spoke. Jamal. Yes, sir? What would you do if money wasn't the problem? The question caught him completely off guard. He frowned. What do you mean? If the surgery was handled. Jamal stared at him. If the bills disappeared. His heart began beating faster. If your grandmother was safe. Arthur leaned forward slightly. What would you do with your life? The answer came immediately, without hesitation, without calculation. I'd go back to school. Arthur smiled. What would you study? Business. That surprised him. Business? Jamal nodded. I want to build things. Arthur's eyebrows lifted. What kind of things? Housing, The answer hung in the air. Arthur looked genuinely curious now. Housing? Jamal nodded again. People shouldn't have to live the way some families do. Arthur remained silent, listening. I know what it feels like when nobody fixes anything. Jamal looked down briefly, then back up. I know what it feels like when people stop caring. Arthur felt something tighten in his chest. Because the young man had no idea who owned West Marlow Towers, no idea who ultimately carried responsibility for the conditions he described. Yet somehow there was no anger in his voice. Only hope. Only a desire to make things better. Arthur exchanged a glance with Margaret. She saw it too. The reason this young man was different, the reason he stood out. Not because he was struggling. Millions struggled. Not because he was kind, though that mattered. What made Jamal extraordinary was that hardship had not stolen his ability to dream. Arthur looked back at him, then took a slow breath, because the next words would change everything. But before he could speak, Margaret's phone vibrated. She glanced down. The smile vanished from her face. Arthur noticed immediately. What is it? Margaret looked up. Concern filled her eyes. It's Richard Kane. Arthur frowned. What about him? Margaret swallowed. He just made a call to someone inside the company. A pause. Then she added quietly, I think he's figured out who Jamal is. Arthur's expression hardened instantly, because he knew exactly what that meant. And for the first time, the situation felt dangerous. Not for him, for Jamal. And somewhere across the city, Richard Kane was already making plans of his own. The moment Margaret delivered the warning, Arthur Whitmore's expression changed. Jamal noticed it immediately. A few seconds earlier, the old billionaire had looked thoughtful. Now he looked dangerous. Not loud, not angry, something colder. The kind of calm that appeared when a man who had built an empire recognized a threat. What did he do? Arthur asked. Margaret looked at her phone. The details are still coming in. Jamal shifted uneasily in his chair. Who is Richard Kane? Arthur and Margaret exchanged a glance. Neither answered immediately. That alone told Jamal enough. Something was wrong. Arthur finally spoke. He manages the property where you live. Jamal frowned. The apartment building? Arthur nodded. A strange feeling settled in Jamal's stomach. Because if Richard Kane was involved, nothing good ever followed. The man seemed to enjoy making life harder for people already struggling. Late rent, broken elevators, maintenance requests. Richard always had a reason why nothing could be fixed, or why someone else was to blame. Arthur stood. I'll handle this. Jamal looked confused. Handle what? Arthur hesitated, then offered a reassuring smile. Hopefully nothing. But even he didn't believe that. An hour later, Jamal returned to the hospital. The meeting with Arthur had left him overwhelmed. He still couldn't fully process everything. Arthur Whitmore. The Arthur Whitmore, one of the richest men in Illinois. And somehow that man knew his name, knew Gloria's situation, knew about the surgery. The entire bus ride back felt unreal. By the time he reached Greenfield Medical Center, the sky had darkened again. Heavy clouds gathered above the city. A storm threatened in the distance. The hospital lobby buzzed with activity. Visitors moved through hallways. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. Life continued as usual. Jamal headed straight toward Gloria's room. He found her awake, a blanket tucked neatly around her shoulders. a television playing softly near the bed. Her smile appeared instantly when she saw him. "Well," Jamal laughed. "Well, what? You met your mysterious friend." News traveled fast when Gloria wanted answers. He pulled a chair beside her bed, then told her everything. The mansion, the photographs, Arthur's identity, the conversation, the questions about school, the questions about the future. Gloria listened carefully. Her eyes widened once or twice, but she didn't seem shocked. If anything, she seemed amused. When he finished, she smiled. "I knew it." Jamal blinked. "Knew what?" "That old man wasn't ordinary. You figured that out from Groceries?" She laughed softly. "No." "Then how?" Gloria looked toward the window. Rain had begun tapping lightly against the glass. The truly wealthy never talk about money. Jamal shook his head. "I still don't understand why he's helping." Gloria studied him, then smiled sadly. "Because maybe he needed help too." The answer lingered in the room. Before Jamal could respond, a knock interrupted them. The door opened. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Immediately, something felt wrong. Not because of the uniforms, because of their expressions. Professional, serious, businesslike. One officer held a clipboard. The other kept his hands folded in front of him. The atmosphere changed instantly. Jamal stood. "Can I help you?" The older officer looked down at the paperwork. "Jamal Carter?" "Yes. We need to speak with you." Gloria's smile vanished. The younger officer stepped forward. "Sir, we've received a complaint regarding an incident involving Arthur Whitmore." Confusion crossed Jamal's face. "What incident?" The older officer checked the report. "An allegation involving possible financial exploitation of an elderly individual." Silence. The words barely made sense. "What?" The officer continued. "The complaint states that you may have deliberately targeted Mr. Whitmore." Jamal stared at him, certain he had misunderstood. "No." The officer remained calm. "Mr. Carter, we'd like you to come with us." Gloria pushed herself upright. "What are you talking about?" The younger officer glanced toward her. "Ma'am, my grandson didn't do anything." Jamal looked from one officer to the other. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, harder to breathe. "I helped him carry groceries." The older officer nodded. "That's what we'd like to discuss." "Discuss?" At the station, reality hit him all at once. This wasn't a conversation. This was an accusation. Gloria's monitor began beeping faster. The sound immediately filled the room. A nurse looked through the doorway. Concern flashed across her face. Jamal raised both hands. "There has to be a mistake." The officers remained professional, but neither backed down. The complaint had been filed. Procedure had begun. And procedure moved forward whether the accusation made sense or not. "Mr. Carter." The younger officer's voice remained respectful. "We need you to come with us." Gloria grabbed Jamal's wrist. Her hand trembled. He didn't do anything. The heart monitor beeped faster. The nurse entered quickly. "Mrs. Carter, please try to relax." But Gloria wasn't listening. Her eyes remained locked on her grandson. The same grandson she had spent 18 years protecting. The same boy who had sacrificed everything for her. The same boy now being treated like a criminal. Fear flooded her face, not for herself, for him. Jamal knelt beside the bed. "It's okay." "No." "Grandma." "No." Her voice cracked. Tears filled her eyes. The sight nearly broke him. Because Gloria rarely cried, almost never. Yet now she looked terrified. The nurse adjusted the monitor. The beeping continued. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Neither seemed happy about this. But the situation had already moved beyond personal feelings. The complaint existed. The report existed. Someone had made serious accusations, and now they were following procedure. The older officer stepped forward. "We'll keep this as smooth as possible." Jamal slowly stood. His legs felt heavy. The room felt distant, unreal, like he was watching someone else's life unfold. The younger officer carefully placed handcuffs around his wrists. The metal clicked softly. One sound, then another. The entire room froze. Gloria gasped. The nurse looked away. Jamal lowered his eyes. Not because he was ashamed, because he couldn't bear seeing Gloria's face. "Grandma," her eyes filled completely. "You didn't do anything." "I know. They can't. It's okay." But it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. The officers guided him toward the door. The hospital hallway stretched endlessly ahead. Bright lights, polished floors, quiet conversations, visitors waiting in chairs. Everyone looked up. Everyone watched. Some looked curious. Some looked suspicious. Some looked away. Jamal kept walking, because he had spent his whole life learning how to survive moments exactly like this. Moments when people assumed the worst before hearing the truth. Moments when explanations didn't matter. Moments when all he could do was endure. Behind him, Gloria called his name. The sound stopped him for half a second. Just half a second. He turned. She sat upright in the hospital bed, tears running down her face, a nurse holding her shoulder, machines beeping urgently around her. Jamal. The word shattered something inside him. He forced a smile he didn't feel, a smile meant only for her. Then he nodded and disappeared into the hallway. Outside, rain began falling harder. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline. The police cruiser pulled away from the hospital entrance. Its red taillights reflected across wet pavement. Several floors above, Gloria sat trembling in her hospital bed. Several miles away, Arthur Whitmore's phone rang. Margaret answered first, listened, then looked toward Arthur. The color drained from her face. "What happened?" Arthur asked. Margaret lowered the phone slowly. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Richard moved first. Arthur stood immediately. His chair slid backward. "What did he do?" Margaret looked directly at him. "He filed a report." Arthur's eyes hardened. "What kind of report?" The answer hit like a hammer. A criminal complaint against Jamal. Silence filled the room. Then Arthur reached for his coat. Because suddenly, this was no longer about helping a young man. Now it was about protecting him. And somewhere downtown, sitting alone in an interrogation room, Jamal Carter had no idea that the only thing standing between him and disaster was the one old man he had helped in the rain. The room was smaller than he expected. Gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, one flickering fluorescent light overhead, no windows, no clock, just silence. The kind of silence that seemed to stretch forever. Jamal sat alone. His wrists still carried faint red marks from the handcuffs. He rubbed them absently. Not because they hurt, because everything else did. His grandmother, the surgery, the accusation, the look on Gloria's face when they led him away. That image wouldn't leave him. It replayed over and over. The fear in her eyes, The helplessness. The tears. Jamal lowered his head. For the first time in days, he felt exhausted enough to collapse. The door opened. A detective entered carrying a folder. Mid-50s, gray hair, tired eyes. His badge identified him as Detective Warren Briggs. Unlike television detectives, he looked more like a school principal than an investigator. He sat down across from Jamal, opened the folder, then looked up. "Jamal Carter, yes, sir." Briggs studied him quietly. The detective had expected something different. Maybe nervousness. Maybe anger. Maybe a rehearsed story. Instead, he saw a tired young man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Do you know why you're here?" Jamal nodded. "Because somebody lied." Briggs raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the answer he expected. "Tell me what happened." Jamal took a slow breath, then started from the beginning. The grocery store, the rain, the 6 bags, Arthur, the walk, the house, the invitation. Everything. He left nothing out, not because he thought it sounded convincing, because it was simply the truth. The detective listened carefully, occasionally making notes, occasionally asking questions, but mostly listening. 20 minutes later, Jamal finished. Silence filled the room. Briggs leaned back. "You carried 6 bags of groceries 3 miles through the rain?" "Yes, sir." "And you didn't ask for money?" "No." "Why?" The question sounded almost genuine. Jamal blinked. "Because he needed help." Briggs stared at him, then looked down at the report, then back at Jamal. "Most people would have taken the money." "Maybe." "You didn't?" "No." "Why not?" Jamal shrugged. "My grandma raised me different." For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Briggs closed the folder. The detective had spent 27 years interviewing people. He had become good at spotting lies. Very good. Something about Jamal didn't fit the accusation. At all. Unfortunately, personal feelings didn't matter. Procedure still mattered. Evidence still mattered. Reports still mattered. The detective stood. "I'll be back." The door closed again. Jamal sat alone. The silence returned. This time louder. Outside the interrogation room, things were moving much faster. Arthur Whitmore's black sedan pulled into the police station parking lot at 5:48 p.m. The rain had returned. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Margaret stepped out first. Arthur followed. The moment he entered the station lobby, conversations began slowing, then stopping, because everyone recognized him. Officers, clerks, visitors, reporters near the front desk. Arthur Whitmore wasn't just wealthy. He was a Chicago institution, a man whose name appeared on hospitals, libraries, and scholarship programs, a man who rarely appeared anywhere without purpose. Tonight, he looked very purposeful. The desk sergeant immediately stood. "Mr. Whitmore." Arthur nodded politely. "I'd like to speak with whoever is handling the complaint against Jamal Carter." The sergeant hesitated, then pointed toward a hallway. "Detective Briggs." "Thank you." Arthur continued walking. Margaret kept pace beside him. Her phone vibrated continuously. Corporate calls, legal calls, media inquiries. She ignored all of them. None mattered right now. At the far end of the hallway, another man stepped out of an office. Tailored suit, silver hair, leather briefcase, confident posture. Arthur smiled slightly. "Good." The man nodded. Graham Bennett, Arthur's personal attorney, one of the best lawyers in Illinois. and one of the few people Arthur trusted completely. Graham extended a hand. I came as soon as Margaret called. Arthur shook it. What do we have? The lawyer opened his briefcase. Several folders appeared. Photographs, reports, printouts. Most importantly, security footage. Arthur's home security system recorded everything. Every arrival, every departure, every conversation near the entrance. The footage showed Jamal arriving, being invited inside, leaving empty-handed, refusing payment. Everything. Every second destroyed the accusation. Graham smiled thinly. We have enough to bury this complaint. Arthur nodded. Good. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Kane sat alone in his office. The first wave of relief had already faded, because something felt wrong. Very wrong. He had expected a phone call by now. Confirmation. Progress. Something. Instead, there was silence. The kind of silence that usually meant trouble. His phone suddenly rang. Richard grabbed it immediately. Hello? The voice on the other end belonged to someone he knew, a former colleague at Whitmore Holdings. The man's tone sounded nervous. Richard. What? A pause. Then, Arthur knows. The blood drained from Richard's face. What? He knows about the complaint. Richard stood abruptly. His chair rolled backward. How? Because he's at the police station. Silence. Pure silence. Then another sentence, one that felt like a hammer. And he brought Graham Bennett. Richard nearly dropped the phone, because everybody knew what that meant. Arthur Whitmore never brought Graham Bennett unless someone was about to lose everything. Back at the station, Detective Briggs reviewed the security footage. Once, twice, then a third time. The video was crystal clear. No theft, no manipulation, no deception. Just a young man helping an old man, then politely leaving, empty-handed. The detective exhaled slowly. The case had collapsed. Completely. He closed the laptop, then looked toward Graham Bennett. So the complaint is false? Graham nodded. Obviously. Briggs rubbed his forehead. Who filed it? Margaret handed over another document. The detective read the name. His expression changed immediately. Richard Kane, property manager. Whitmore Holdings. Briggs looked up. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly this no longer looked like a misunderstanding. It looked intentional. The detective stood. I'll handle the paperwork. Arthur nodded. But before Briggs could leave, Arthur spoke. One more thing. The detective turned. Arthur's voice remained calm. Almost too calm. The young man in that room, he pointed toward the interrogation area, has spent 3 days trying to save his grandmother's life. Briggs listened. He carried my groceries home because nobody else would help. Arthur's eyes hardened. He belongs with his family tonight. The detective nodded once. Understood. 10 minutes later, the interrogation room door opened. Jamal looked up, expecting more questions. Instead, he saw Graham Bennett. The lawyer smiled warmly. Mr. Carter. Jamal frowned. Who are you? Graham Bennett. The lawyer stepped inside. I'm here on behalf of Arthur Whitmore. Confusion crossed Jamal's face. What happened? Graham's smile widened slightly. The truth happened. Jamal stared at him, still not understanding. Then Graham said the words that changed everything. You're free to go. For several seconds, Jamal simply sat there, not moving, not speaking. The words felt unreal, like hearing another language. Finally, he managed, "What?" "The complaint has been disproven." Jamal blinked. Disproven? The security footage tells a very different story. Slowly, the reality began sinking in. The accusation, the footage, Arthur, the lawyer, the truth, all of it. A weight lifted from his chest. Not completely. His grandmother was still in the hospital. The surgery still loomed. Life was still uncertain. But at least this nightmare was ending. Graham extended a hand. "Come on." Jamal stood. His legs felt weak. The hallway seemed brighter somehow. Larger. Lighter. As they walked toward the exit, he noticed Arthur waiting near the lobby. The old man stood beside Margaret, cane in one hand, coat draped neatly over his shoulders, watching, waiting. The moment Arthur saw him, he smiled. Not a billionaire's smile, not a corporate leader's smile, just a grateful old man's smile. And suddenly, Jamal realized something. The man he had helped in the rain hadn't forgotten, not for a second. But neither of them knew that while Jamal was walking free, Richard Kane was already watching his entire life begin to collapse. The call came at 7:12 p.m. Richard was still sitting in his office, the same office where he had spent years hiding complaints, ignoring repairs, avoiding accountability. The same office where he once felt untouchable. Now every ringing phone sounded like a threat. Every email felt dangerous. His cell phone vibrated. A corporate number. Richard answered immediately. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was brief, professional, cold. "Mr. Kane." "Yes?" "There will be an executive meeting tonight." Richard frowned. "Tonight?" 8 o'clock. His stomach tightened. What is this about? A pause. Then, attendance is mandatory. The line disconnected. Richard stared at the phone. No agenda. No explanation. No details. That was worse. Much worse. Because in large companies, surprise meetings rarely brought good news. Across town, Jamal stepped through the hospital doors. The rain had stopped. Fresh night air filled his lungs. For the first time in hours, he wasn't sitting under fluorescent lights. For the first time in days, he wasn't alone. Arthur Whitmore stood beside the black sedan. Margaret nearby. Graham Bennett talking quietly on his phone. Arthur smiled when he saw him. "You look exhausted." Jamal laughed softly. "I feel exhausted." "I imagine so." For a moment, neither spoke. The city lights reflected off wet pavement. Traffic hummed in the distance. Then Arthur looked directly at him. "The surgery is tomorrow morning." Jamal nodded. His chest tightened immediately. Tomorrow. Everything depended on tomorrow. Arthur studied him carefully, then asked, "Have you eaten?" Jamal hesitated. "Wrong answer." Arthur smiled. "I'll take that as a no." 20 minutes later, they sat inside a quiet diner not far from the hospital. The place smelled like coffee and grilled onions. Old country music played softly overhead. A waitress recognized Arthur immediately. Jamal noticed. Everyone seemed to recognize Arthur. Yet the billionaire treated every person exactly the same. The waitress, the cashier, the cook. Everybody. No arrogance, no performance. Just respect. It reminded Jamal of Gloria. The thought made him smile. Arthur noticed. "What?" "You remind me of somebody." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "My grandma." That surprised him. Arthur laughed. I've been called many things. Jamal smiled. But she always says the way you treat people tells the truth about who you are. Arthur looked down at his coffee. The words lingered, because he knew exactly how many people in business forgot that lesson. Eventually, he looked back up, then made a decision. Jamal. Yes, sir? I'm paying for the surgery. The words landed quietly, yet they changed everything. For a second, Jamal thought he misheard. The diner seemed to disappear around him. The sounds, the music, the conversations. Everything faded. What? Arthur's expression remained calm. The surgery. Jamal stared. $92,000. Yes. No. Arthur smiled gently. Yes. Jamal shook his head immediately. No, sir. Arthur expected that. I appreciate it. You don't have to, I know. No. Arthur leaned forward. Jamal. The young man looked overwhelmed, almost panicked. I can't let you do that. Why? Because... The answer died halfway out. Because what? Because he wasn't used to receiving help? Because he didn't know how? Because life had taught him that nothing came free? Arthur understood. The old billionaire nodded slowly. I know what you're thinking. Jamal lowered his eyes. You don't owe me anything. Arthur smiled. Actually, I do. Jamal looked confused. Arthur continued. 3 days ago, I was standing in the rain. Silence. You didn't know who I was. A pause. You didn't know what I owned. Another pause. You didn't know I could ever repay you. Jamal said nothing. Because it was true. Arthur's voice softened. You helped anyway. The words settled between them. Simple, honest, powerful. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Arthur added quietly, Let me help. Jamal looked away. His eyes burned. Not because of pride, because hope hurt when you'd lived without it too long. Finally, he nodded. Just once. Arthur smiled. The matter was settled. Across the city, Richard Kane entered Whitmore Tower. The building rose above downtown like a monument of glass and steel. 40 stories, millions of dollars, hundreds of employees. Richard had walked through these doors for 9 years. Tonight felt different. The lobby seemed quieter, colder. Security officers watched him pass. Executives avoided eye contact. Nobody smiled. Nobody greeted him. By the time he reached the executive conference room on the 40th floor, his palms were sweating. The doors stood open. Inside sat the entire board, corporate attorneys, department heads, senior executives, Margaret Cole. And at the head of the table, Arthur Whitmore. Richard immediately knew. The fear he'd been fighting all day became certainty. They knew. Everyone knew. Sit down, Richard. Arthur's voice remained calm. That somehow made it worse. Richard sat. The conference room overlooked the entire city. Thousands of lights glittered below. Nobody admired the view. Margaret clicked a button. The projector came alive. The first image appeared. West Marlow Towers. Maintenance reports. Repair requests. Tenant complaints. Month after month. Year after year. Ignored. Another slide appeared. Financial records. Approved repair budgets. Money allocated. Money withdrawn. Repairs never completed. Richard felt his throat tighten. The room remained silent. Then came the next slide. Gloria Carter. Apartment 4B. Medical accommodation requests. Elevator complaints. Safety concerns. Ignored. Arthur finally stood. Slowly. Deliberately. The room grew even quieter. 9 years ago, Arthur began, I hired Richard Kane to help manage our residential properties. Nobody interrupted. Arthur continued. His responsibility was simple. He looked directly at Richard. Take care of the people. The words echoed through the room. Richard stared at the table, unable to look up. Arthur's voice remained steady. Instead, he ignored them. Another slide appeared. Photographs, broken elevators, unsafe stairwells, leaking ceilings, damaged apartments. More silence. Then Arthur showed the final image. Jamal Carter, standing in the rain, carrying 6 grocery bags. Richard's stomach dropped. Arthur looked around the room. 3 days ago, this young man helped me. The board members watched quietly. He expected nothing. Arthur paused. Nothing. The word hung in the air. Then Arthur looked back at Richard. And when Mr. Kane learned I was helping that young man, he filed a false complaint against him. No one moved. No one spoke. The accusation filled the room like thunder. Arthur continued. He attempted to destroy the reputation of an 18-year-old boy whose only mistake was being more honorable than the adults around him. Richard finally spoke. His voice sounded weak. Arthur, no. The single word stopped him. Arthur rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. The disappointment alone was devastating. You had opportunities. Richard lowered his eyes. You had responsibilities. Another pause. You failed both. The board chairman cleared his throat, then called for a vote. The result took less than 30 seconds. Unanimous. Termination. Full investigation. Referral to authorities regarding the false complaint. 9 years ended in under a minute. Security waited outside the room. Richard stood slowly. Nobody looked at him. Nobody defended him. Nobody argued. The meeting was over. His career was over. And deep down, he knew he deserved it. Half an hour later, he rode the elevator down alone. The cardboard box in his arms felt heavier than it should have. When the doors opened into the lobby, he stepped forward, then froze. Standing near the entrance was Jamal Carter. He had just arrived with Arthur. The two men looked at each other. For a moment, neither spoke. Richard expected anger, expected satisfaction, expected revenge. Instead, he saw something else. Disappointment. Quiet disappointment. The same look Gloria sometimes gave people who should have known better. Richard looked away first. He couldn't help it. Jamal watched him leave, then watched the doors close behind him. Arthur stepped beside him. Neither man said anything for several seconds. Then Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder. You know what I learned after 40 years in business? Jamal glanced toward him. What? Arthur smiled. The most valuable people in any room usually aren't the richest. The city lights sparkled beyond the glass. The storm was finally gone, and for the first time since Gloria entered the hospital, Jamal felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. Real hope. Because tomorrow morning, Gloria would enter surgery, and whether she lived or died, everything had already changed. The hospital waiting room was nearly empty. Outside, dawn slowly painted the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and pale blue. The storm that had dominated the city for days had finally passed. Sunlight touched the glass towers downtown. The streets below glistened from the night's rain. Inside Greenfield Medical Center, Jamal Carter sat alone. His elbows rested on his knees. His hands were clasped together. His eyes never left the surgical doors. Everything came down to this. 3 days, 72 hours, $92,000. Fear, hope, prayer. All of it had led here. A nurse passed, then another. Families whispered nearby. Coffee machines hummed. The world kept moving. Yet for Jamal, time felt frozen. Every minute stretched endlessly. Every second carried weight. Arthur Whitmore sat beside him. Neither man spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. Sometimes the greatest comfort was simply not being alone. Margaret arrived shortly after sunrise. Then Graham Bennett. Then Frank from the community kitchen. One by one, people gathered. Not because anyone asked them to, because they cared. Jamal noticed, and for the first time in years, he realized something. He wasn't as alone as he had always believed. 3 hours passed, then 4. The waiting room grew brighter as morning turned toward noon. Finally, the surgical doors opened. Dr. Reynolds stepped through. Everyone stood. Jamal's heart nearly stopped. The doctor's expression revealed nothing. For a moment, the silence felt unbearable. Then she smiled. A real smile. The kind doctors rarely gave unless they carried good news. She made it. The words hit Jamal like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a second, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her heart responded beautifully. The doctor's smile widened. The surgery was successful. Everything blurred. The room, the people, the lights. All of it disappeared behind a wave of emotion he had spent years holding back. Jamal covered his face and cried. Not quietly, not politely, not the way adults often forced themselves to cry. This was different. These were 18 years of fear, 18 years of sacrifice, 18 years of carrying burdens too heavy for a child. Everything finally broke free at once. Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder, said nothing, because nothing needed saying. The tears continued, and for once Jamal didn't apologize for them. 2 weeks later, sunlight filled Gloria Carter's hospital room. The oxygen tubes were gone. The machines were quieter. Her color had returned. Strength slowly returned with it. She sat upright near the window, watching children play in a small courtyard below. A smile rested on her face, the kind that only appears after surviving something difficult. A knock came at the door. Arthur entered carrying yellow roses. Gloria laughed immediately. "My favorite." Arthur grinned. "I had help choosing them." "Jamal?" "Immediately." That earned another laugh. The room felt warm, comfortable, alive. Arthur sat beside her. For nearly an hour they talked. About Chicago, about grandchildren, about old memories, about life. At one point, Gloria looked directly at him. Her eyes softened. "You saved my grandson." Arthur shook his head. "No." "Yes, you did." He smiled gently, then glanced toward the hallway where Jamal was speaking with a nurse. "Truth is," Arthur paused, "he saved me first." Gloria studied him, understanding immediately, because loneliness recognized loneliness, and healing recognized healing. Several weeks later, Arthur Whitmore stood at a podium inside the headquarters of Whitmore Holdings. Reporters filled the room. Cameras flashed. Executives watched from the back. Beside Arthur stood Jamal Carter, still uncomfortable wearing a suit, still adjusting the tie, still looking like someone who hadn't fully accepted that his life had changed. Arthur smiled toward the crowd, then announced something nobody expected. The Carter Kindness Fund, a scholarship program created for young people from low-income communities who demonstrated extraordinary compassion and service. Full tuition, housing, books, support, opportunity, hope. Jamal became the first recipient. The room erupted in applause. Reporters rushed to ask questions. Photographers captured the moment. Yet none of that mattered as much as one thing. Gloria was there, watching proudly from the front row. Months passed. Winter faded. Spring arrived. Then summer. Life slowly rebuilt itself. The changes came one step at a time. Jamal returned to school, then enrolled in college, business administration. Exactly as he had dreamed. Arthur kept his promise. Every tuition payment, every textbook, every opportunity, handled. But Arthur never called it charity. He called it investment. An investment in someone who deserved a chance. Gloria moved into a new apartment, a beautiful place on the west side. Clean hallways, working elevators, safe neighborhoods, large windows overlooking a park. Every morning sunlight poured through those windows. Every morning she smiled. The first thing Jamal hung on the living room wall was a framed photograph. Not of Arthur, not of the scholarship, not of the ceremony. It was a picture of his mother. Beside it sat a photograph of Gloria. Beside that sat a simple picture taken on a rainy afternoon. A picture Margaret had secretly captured. An old white man. A young black teenager. 6 grocery bags. Rain falling around them. Neither smiling, neither posing. Just walking. Helping. Human. Arthur visited often. Sometimes for dinner, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for no reason at all. The friendship surprised everyone except the people who understood it best. Gloria once described it perfectly. 2 stubborn men who needed each other. Neither Arthur nor Jamal argued. 1 year later, the Carter Kindness Fund had already changed 12 lives, 12 students, 12 families, 12 futures. All because one person chose kindness when nobody was watching. On a cool autumn afternoon, Jamal crossed the university campus carrying a backpack and a stack of books. Leaves drifted across walkways. Students hurried between classes. The future stretched ahead of him. Bright. Possible. Earned. His phone rang. Gloria. He smiled immediately. Hey, Grandma. Did you eat breakfast? Jamal laughed. Some things never changed. Yes. A pause. You're lying. He laughed harder. Maybe. Go eat. Yes, ma'am. The call ended. Jamal slipped the phone into his pocket, then continued across campus. Halfway to class, he noticed an elderly man struggling with several grocery bags near a parking lot. One bag split. Cans rolled across the pavement. People walked around him. Nobody stopped. For a moment, the scene looked strangely familiar. Jamal smiled, then immediately changed direction. The old man looked up as he approached. You don't have to do that, son. Jamal picked up the cans, placed them back inside the bag, then lifted the groceries. A memory flashed through his mind. Rain. A parking lot. An old man. A decision. The moment everything changed. He smiled. Yeah, Jamal said. I kinda do. Together they started walking. Across campus. Into the afternoon sunlight. And somewhere far behind them, life quietly completed a circle. because Gloria had been right all along. Kindness doesn't disappear. It travels. It echoes. It waits. And sometimes, it finds its way back to the very people who gave it away. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share one act of kindness that changed your life. You never know who might need that reminder today. And before you go, I want to ask you something simple. If you believe kindness still matters in this world, type the number 1 in the comments. If you've ever helped someone without expecting anything back, type the number 2. And if you're still waiting for your own miracle, type the number 3 so this community can send some encouragement your way. I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to know which number you chose. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more powerful than this one. Here on this channel, we share real stories that remind us that good people still exist, hope is never gone, and one small act of kindness can change a life forever. We'll see you in the next story.